All right, joining me now is Dr. Mark Krasnow. Hey, Mark, thanks for coming back on the podcast.
Oh, no worries. Good to see you again, Fritz.
Yeah, it's been all the way since episode 47 that we did on crop thinning. That was a good one. If the listener likes what you have to say today, I suggest they go back and listen to episode 47.
Yep.
Yeah, but it's been a couple years. So before we talk about vine stress, can you give the listener a brief recap on how you got interested in viticulture, what your focus is now, what you do through your company, Thoughtful Viticulture Consulting? Just give us a quick reminder.
Yeah. I mean, I came to viticulture sort of from the dark side. I thought I wanted to be a winemaker, studied to be a winemaker, and then came to two observations. One, winemaking is a hell of a lot of cleaning. And two, if you really wanted to affect the quality of the wine, viticulture had a much more of an impact than what you did in the cellar. You know, what you got from the vineyard really determined your quality. All you could do was try to bring the best out from that. So I got really interested in sort of that, the biochemistry of ripening and how we can better sort of farm to get the wine that we want. And then moved to New Zealand actually for an academic role, teaching at a polytech here. And while I was there, I did research, and sort of the industry said, we're keen for you to provide research as an external research provider. And I wanted to sort of get into consulting anyway. So I started my company, where I do research for, independent companies, research for the industry funded stuff, just some stuff for fun, and then work with individual clients. Let's talk about irrigation in the first sense here. So if you're growing reds and you're trying for quality, so you're leaf plucking and maintaining an open microclimate, but at the same time, you're giving your vines luxury water. When vines have luxury water, they grow leaves, right? They grow laterals, they grow shoot tips. And so, you're almost being counter to your purposes of growing a high-end red by the way that you're keeping your vines alive. You know what I mean? And so a more holistic view of what all of the levers that you're pulling in the vineyard are impacting your vine and how it ripens and how those grapes eventually make it to the winery. I think taking that sort of 30,000 foot view on what you're doing in the vineyard holistically, I think really helps, because you're there to grow grapes for wine. And here in Marlborough, it's a little bit different. There is very little relationship between yield and quality. And up until very recently, everyone wanted to get as much yield as possible. So the idea of holding back on water, even if it means I have to trim a little more, if the berries weigh a little bit more.
Yeah.
But
water equals yield up to a certain point. And if you're already at your maximum yield and you need more, adding more water probably gets you a little closer, right?
Yes. But I would say water also increases disease risk because you grow leaves that cover fruit and you compromise spray penetration.
Yeah.
So it is a dual-edged sword, right?
And probably tighter clusters because the berries are bigger if you're overwatering, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So you talk about three main types of stress for grapes in your recent article. So water, heat, and wind are really the big ones. So I kind of want to take these and dissect them one at a time here. So why don't we start with water stress first, because that's the one we've been talking about the most.
Yeah.
This is probably the one that most growers worry about. They're always, a grower who has no means of taking data other than visual observation is probably going to worry the most because they just don't know what's going on without data. And as you mentioned, and we all know, if you wait until you start to see the vine suffering from what we truly believe is water stress, it's usually too late. So do most growers overwater because they just assume their vines are stressed? What are most growers thinking when you go to a client and you ask them about their irrigation program and you realize they're kind of winging it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so here in New Zealand, to get the sustainability accreditation, you have to monitor water in some way. And that can be like saying I go out and look at shoot tips, right? I do visual monitoring. But I would say most people have soil probes. It's a really common tool here. But, how you interpret that data is, it's a wonderful tool. It gives you wonderful data, but how you interpret that data is super important. And I wrote a whole blog on soil probes and my thoughts on them.
Okay.
But if you're watering to a soil probe that is set to, a conservative threshold, of we're going to water when the topsoil, because you're only measuring the top meter or so.
Correct.
Topsoil gets to X% soil moisture, we're going to top it up. Whether the vines are actually dry at that point wasn't really considered. It was just thought, if that topsoil dries down, my vines might slow down and I want to keep them going. So I'm going to put on.
Yeah. So what are some actual water stress symptoms or signs that growers should look for then? We've talked about things that can be confused as water stress, especially early in the season. What should a grower really look for?
Well, I mean, honestly, it can be the same symptoms, right? Stunted growth. The first thing that happens as water becomes limiting for grapes is that they start slowing shoot elongation progressively as they get drier. They start slowing leaf expansion. So you do see short canopies. You do see, smaller leaves, but this is later in the season. I'm not talking about it's 3 weeks after bud burst and I'm used to having shoots like this. And, this year they're like this. You see shoot tip morphology changes. Well-watered vine has tendrils that sort of reach well past the shoot tip. And as water limitation sets in, those tendrils extend less. I mean, it's the same thing. There's less water to inflate the cells so they don't expand as much. Plus, building more canopy when water limitation is coming on is a terrible choice for a grape, right? For any plants.
Yeah.
More evaporative area when water is becoming limited is a terrible choice. So they make the right choice and start to limit the area.
Yeah.
More severe stress, you start to see leaves senescing. In between, what you have is stomatal regulation, where leaves will slowly, depending on how quickly they dry off, close their stomata, which saves water but slows photosynthesis. It's a trade-off. And when all of the stomata are closed and they can't really do photosynthesis and have to rely on reserves and incur damage to the chloroplast, that's when you can start to get yellowing leaves.
Got it.
Yeah. And the time from sort of fully closed stomata to yellow leaves is pretty context dependent. The age of the vine, the reserve status, how hot it is are going to all impact that.
What plant part are you putting in that pressure chamber, that device?
It's still a leaf. It's only called stem because you put a bag over the leaf to prevent transpiration, so that leaf comes to equilibration with the stem that it's attached to, which is more or less in equilibrium with the trunk, slightly more negative to drive water use. But with stem, you get a much more consistent number. Every leaf on that vine will give you more or less the same number. Whereas with leaf water potential, where you're just capturing that leaf at a moment in time, a breeze, sun exposure, the temperature on that leaf affect the number you get from that leaf. So you have to do multiple leaves per vine.
Okay.
So it's a philosophical choice. I worked in a lab where I had sort of one advisor that was a leaf guy and one that was a stem guy. I'm definitely a stem guy.